I'm very grateful for the invitation of the co-organizers of this conference again to express my gratitude, among other things because we need an honest and straightforward debate on all these issues concerning religious processes in Southeast Europe after the Cold War, particularly in the context of my topic, where I will try to show we have some problem areas in the way we're approaching religious heritage within the European Union policy documents and the way religious heritage is approached, historical religious heritage is approached in Southeast Europe. So my main topics will focus on cultural and religious heritage protection in modern Europe, the implications of such protection for diverse communities, including minority groups, national and international tools to protect religious heritage. Religious heritage is a human rights issue. Existing international and regional avenues of religious heritage protection in the framework of general cultural heritage protection, the topical issues of religious heritage protection in conflict zones, and the potential vehicle for reconciliation between antagonistic groups. With the evolving re-religification of political conflicts within the modern state and interstate relation in the post-Cold War era, the issues of religious heritage and sacred space were brought to the forefront of contemporary theological, legal, anthropological, and sociological inquiry, as well as national and international policy making. This increasing focus on sacred heritage has highlighted the topical problems of intercultural and interreligious conflicts, or alternatively, bridge building and sharing related to religious heritage and sacred sites in a variety of conflict and post-conflict zones, regions and contexts, including Southeastern Europe. Religious heritage and sacred places have and continue to suffer destruction and damage, not only in conflict and post-conflict situations, but also as a result of uncontrolled commercial development, mass tourism, and even unsuccessful restoration efforts. In the first slide, you will see some of the standard cultural heritage protection conventions and declaration as a background to the discussion, which are international. During the past couple of decades, heritage has become topical in a new way in the European Union, as the concept has been utilized for political purposes in the EU cultural policy. And here I will demonstrate with several slides the language and the vocabulary which is used by the European Union policy making. The main focuses of the European Union's heritage politics are the politics of integration, image building, education, governmentality, and the economy. So the first slide, you see the Treaty of Lisbon and the way the heritage of Europe was approached. So they're speaking here in the Treaty of Lisbon about cultural, religious, and humanist inheritance of Europe. This is one of the very rare European Union documents where religion is actually mentioned, religion or religious. I will return to this point again. In the build-up to the document, actually, some Catholic majority countries wanted Christian heritage to be included, not only religious, but the document ended with religious and humanist inheritance of Europe. Humanist, in most cases, means atheist. Later it was understood that it also includes Freemasonry in the European context. The fundamental strategy in the implementation of the European Union heritage politics is to mingle the top-down and bottom-up dynamics between the EU and the local agents. This at the same time is ideological core to produce self-creating and self-maintaining coherency and cultural integration into the European Union. Heritage is not only cultural, but also political concept, which is easily instrumentalized for the use of diverse identity projects. The concept is inseparable from the emergence of the idea of national cultures and the development of the nation state. Many of the institutions for which heritage is still currently promoted have played a crucial role in the nation-building processes in Europe in the 19th and early 20th century. However, heritage has also been approached from a universalistic point of view, in which it is considered as a common property of all human beings and as a shared legacy of civilization. This kind of discourse forms the basis of the UNESCO World Heritage Convention, and during the past couple of decades, the idea of heritage has become topical in a new way in Europe, as the concept has been utilized for supranational purposes in the EU policy. Since the end of the 1980s, the European Union has started increasingly to pay attention to the cultural connections and the identification of its citizens. Due to these strivings, culture has attained a major role in the European Union current integration discourses and policies. In these discourses and policies, the idea of cultural heritage in particular has been utilized for the aims of creating communality and feeling of belonging among the citizens of the European Union. Several core European Union documents, such as the Treaty of Lisbon, the European Agenda for Culture in the Globalizing World, and the various recent discussions on cultural and civic programs, foster the idea of a common European identity by emphasizing the cultural heritage as a common layer of meaning shared by all the Europeans. The rhetoric in these documents directs to narrate and interpret the local, regional, and national heritage in the member state as European. The identification of the common transnational European heritage, or the Europeanization of the local, regional, and national heritages, is taken into practice in the implementation of the European Union's cultural programs and actions at the local level. The idea of the common European heritage has been also concretized in the official European Union symbols, such as the architectural iconographic designs on the European or the Euro coins and banknotes. Common European identity and heritage as its mediator and maintainer are not addressed only in the European Union cultural initiatives and symbols. The attempts of fostering European identity are related to a broader frame of the European Union's urban and regional policies. Thus, the European Union's urban and regional policies are intertwined with the identity politics. Besides cultural initiatives, the European Union's interest on regional development and regeneration has been administered through European Social Fund, ESF, and the European Regional Development Fund. The EU currently administers or supports three major initiatives: the European Heritage Days, the European Union Prize for Cultural Heritage, and the European Heritage Label. These that address the fostering of the transnational European cultural heritage. The European Heritage Days were officially launched by the Council of Europe in 1991, but since 1999 it has been organized as a joint initiative between the Council of Europe and the European Union. In 2002, the European Commission launched the European Union Prize for Cultural Heritage as a part of the implementation of the Culture 2000 program. Just to pay another attention to some of these European policy documents that you could see, and the way they treat, in this case, community law, European community law, how it protects the churches and the religious community. There is a notion of spiritual and moral heritage and the diversity of cultures and traditions of the people of Europe, as well as the national identities of the member states. And some of the sort of general descriptions of the unity and diversity within the European Union as a background information, the way they're approaching these topics. The European Union heritage politics also resulted in the European Heritage Label Scheme, which was launched in 2006, first as an intergovernmental initiative under the leadership of France, Spain, and Hungary. The scheme was considered important by the European Parliament and the European Council, and in 2008, the European Council adopted conclusions transforming the initiative into an official European Union action. The action was launched in 2013 with 2 years transitional provisions, after which it will turn into a regular action. The labeled sites are first pre-selected at the national level, and the final selection is made by an expert panel appointed at the European Union level. The European Union heritage politics is a discursive attempt to produce the European cultural identity and define the relations between it, the identity, and the integration into the European Union. It promotes a consensus approach to history by smoothing over the possible conflicts and social differences between people. The rhetoric in the European Union's heritage initiatives represents the history of Europe as a unification narrative and a source of common European identity. By discussing the European heritage in consensual and collective terms, heritage assumes the shape of a practice through which the evidence from the past becomes a common European heritage. The language of the main objectives in the data reflects and repeats the idea of the European Union official slogan, united in diversity, by simultaneously emphasizing the importance of strengthening the unity of the Union and respecting its manifold diversity. Even though the European Union policy rhetoric emphasizes diversity as a core value of the European Union, the fostering of unity, coherence, and multi-level integration in the European Union dominates the emphasis on diversity. The attempts to stress cultural diversity and the importance of respecting it can also be interpreted as instruments or phases in the creation of common European cultural heritage. Fostering diversity and paradoxically unity at the same time in European culture is expected to produce a dialogue and understanding between people and familiarization with different cultural features, a participation in cultural events, and finally, a feeling of belonging to a common European culture. Recently, the European Union has adopted a new discursive approach regarding the diversity issues and the cultural and social challenges the diversification of European societies has brought along. The policy objectives of these heritage initiatives includes the rhetorics of this new diversity discourse by emphasizing the promotion of the intercultural dialogue as its focus, which you can see here in one of the main documents, with 5 main spheres of activity and initiatives. These are some of the documents which were created just before 2010 and in the following years to cultivate this particular project. And on one hand, we have politics of integration, which I mentioned, on the national, regional, and local history, culture, heritage, assimilation of heritage politics with identity politics. We have politics of image making, which means increasing the visibility of the EU in heritage sites, placing heritage branding. The politics of the art of government. So we have combining top-down policies with bottom-up initiatives, or trying to present top-down policies as bottom-up initiatives. And we have the politics of economy, boosting cultural tourism, strengthening cultural industries, enabling regional developments. Even though the core EU policy documents emphasize the importance of fostering this cultural, linguistic, and regional diversity in Europe, the underlying goal of the policy rhetoric in them is strengthening of the EU integration at different levels. So we can see how this is expressed in this particular policy document from the EU, where the lack of strong European identity is seen as one of the major problems in the European Union. Hence, for the European Union, heritage serves as a practical instrument to rethink and develop its public image, which was, in its preparatory documents, also the European Heritage Label, considered to be very poor and having worsened in the end of the last decade. This is before 2010. So the identity problem. Heritage as a physical, well-known tourist and religious sites potentially invokes familiarity in Europeans and positive associations among people. Thus, the politics of image making in the European Union heritage politics aims to take advantage of the positive association of heritage sites in order to uplift the image of the European Union as a cultural rather than bureaucratic political community. The international dimension of the events associated with the European Heritage Label, about which I will speak soon, are designed to foster participants' feeling of belonging to a single community, values and destiny recognized as Europe. And in the politics of the economy, the politics of image making is also promoted in the data, in the strategy of branding, heritage branding. Through heritage brands, the EU aims to increase its visibility, positive images, and compatibility with other international but also national heritage agents. Strong and competitive heritage brands are also strategic tools in the attempts to create bottom-up integration in the European Union. As in the case of the European Heritage Label, the sites are expected to compete for the label and produce the common European heritage on their own initiative. This is one of the major initiatives of the European Union, the European Heritage Label. I'm not going to read this. You can see how it functions, the candidates and the way they present the pan-European nature of the monuments or the historical phases they want to present. And point 3, how they also are supposed to present major phase in the development promotion of the common values that underpin European integration. And more of this justification of this particular project on the European heritage labels and their symbolic value in the process of European integration. So, since 2013, these sites have been carefully selected for their symbolic value, as they say, the role they have played in the European history, and activities they offer that brings the European Union and its citizens closer together. So this was the more boring part of my talk, presenting the documents. So let's see what happened in reality. This is all abstract theory, policy making, etc. Let's see now the reality and to what extent the European Union policy making is close to the actual reality. This is the map of the sites that were awarded European Heritage Label and take part of this big identity project in the European Union. As you can see, Southeast Europe is hardly represented. This is 2022, so this year may be more candidates. So there is some list of the sites. The heart of ancient Athens, Greece, is presented, and interestingly, one of the Neanderthal caves in Croatia, the so-called Krapina cave, which is also seen, so the Neanderthal period is seen as also part of the European integration project, which attracted a lot of sarcastic comments, as you can imagine. You could see some of the other sides. As you can see, sides of symbolic importance, first constitutions, abolition of death penalty, Academy of Music, etc. This is the motivation for the Neanderthal cave being part of the European identity project, which, as I said, attracted a lot of sarcastic comments. But more importantly is what you can see here, or actually what you cannot see here, are religious sites. We have one or two, but the great majority of the sites represent different sites with importance for European cultural history, constitutional history, political history, etc., but hardly any religious site. And the purpose of the European Heritage Days, which is connected also to this particular project, again was seen as a part of this general project of stimulating interest in Europe's cultural heritage, counter racism and xenophobia, and encourage greater tolerance for the other cultures in Europe. In the period between 2010 and 2024, the European Union, the Council of the European Union, had these 4 documents on cultural heritage, beginning from the conclusions on the cultural heritage as strategic resource, and going for the other documents, including the last one on European historical consciousness, which was passed by the European Parliament in January this year. I have checked these documents very carefully. I didn't see in any event the word religious or spiritual mentioned. So, in these particular documents on cultural heritage, religious heritage is subsumed, assimilated into the general category of cultural heritage, but even then, some of the major sites of Europe do not figure in the projects that were created by the European Union between 2010-11 to this particular year, 2024. So this is a major omission in the European policy documents during this period. Actually, if one is to use the liberal vocabulary, it amounts to discrimination by omission. You know, there is this term also. So, what has happened meanwhile? We have had, one second, in real terms, we can see, for example, from this particular documents, the hate crimes against religious sites. I'll focus on Western Europe. If you read this particular document, we have 1,000 hate crimes in France against Christians last year, 90% of them against property such as cemeteries and churches. Last November, the Dutch elections, which is the core state of the Benelux and the European Union, as you know, were won by a party that wants to, in its program document, wanted to criminalize and outlaw Islamic religious heritage, both mosques and textual written heritage. Now they have revoked it, but of course it entered the mainstream discourse in this particular case. So in actual reality, we have the opposite of what some of these documents were supposed to fight and battle. And actually, the problem is intensifying, as you know, particularly in Western Europe. So in this particular case, the omission of religious heritage has not served well the European policy documents. In the last 10 years, we have had the European religious pilgrimage routes enjoying a major revival, like the route of Camino de Santiago, Santiago de Compostela, which is part of the UNESCO World Heritage list of sites. You can see the European, and you can see also the quote from Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Europe was born of pilgrimage. But they are not acknowledged in any of these European cultural heritage documents. So we have asymmetry between the actual developments on the ground in the European Union and the vocabulary and the policies advocated in the main European Union cultural heritage documents. You remember perhaps that just before the pandemic, the most emblematic site in Western Europe, Notre Dame, in Paris, suffered this major fire in the first day of the Holy Week of 2019. And the process of its restoration in the first year was greatly delayed due to concerns that a major restoration project, which is funded by the state, may infringe on the secularist values of the French Republic. So 1 year the Catholic Church was supposed to raise money, 140 million, while the state and the businesses who approached to be sponsors did not dare to fund the religious site, not to infringe secularist values. And this was mentioned by the PR communicator of the Notre Dame de Paris, who actually said that we are approaching a situation which is close to the Soviet repression of religious life, religious churches in the 1920s and the 30s. Very strong language. So we have also certain type of secularism which is embedded in attitudes or in policy documents, which has prevented some of these sort of major problems or problem areas being addressed as they must. So returning to, although in the sphere of UNESCO, for example, some of these pilgrimage routes, including those in Italy, were included in the both tangible and intangible heritage lists. So going to Southeast Europe, what positive Southeast Europe can contribute to all these interactions between European Union heritage policies and the realities in Southeast Europe. Unfortunately, in the post-conflict situations, we don't have as yet good coordination between the culture ministries of the various states, member states of the European Union in Southeast Europe and the candidate member states. So an obvious case where such classical historic route, which is also pilgrimage route, could be integrated to some of these programs is the old Via Militaris, which goes from Central Europe to historic Constantinople via Belgrade, Niš, Sofia, Philippopolis, etc. Unfortunately, this opportunity was missed when we had anniversary of the Edict of Tolerance of Constantine the Great with his Central Balkan origins. The Balkan countries, Bulgaria, Serbia, did not cooperate in the anniversary and tried to include it in the celebrations, and a major opportunity was missed. But at the same time, as you know, we have a revival of pilgrimage routes in Southeast Europe, both Orthodox Christian, Catholic Christian, Islamic, and Jewish. We have a major revival which in future projects needs to be properly acknowledged. Finally, two documents which present some positive light on the matters that I mentioned. The first European document on the role of the European Union in the protection and enhancement of cultural heritage and conflict in the Middle East, Iraq, is a much better document than the previous one. It focuses on the divided heritage in Iraq, following the succession of military conflicts. And because they actually employed academics from the area, and academics also in Europe and in the United States to do it. Actually, religious and spiritual heritage is mentioned in the document, which is a major development after this secularist bias which I described. The second document which did not work, but could potentially work in the future, and may have implications for some of our discussions, was the attempted European Union Declaration on the Protection and Enhancement of Sacred Places in the Mediterranean. This was a major project in which I took part between 2009 and 2012, which was coordinated originally by the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Then the European Commission joined it. In 2014, there was supposed to be a Cyprus Declaration, the final convention, several pages, which was going to be a major development and change the game, change the state of play in the European Union and its approach to actual protection of religious sites. Unfortunately, the European Union officials who came to Cyprus, and this was a period in which Cyprus had financial problems vis-à-vis the European Union, did not properly cultivate their relations with the Cypriot Orthodox Church in advance. So what I was saying, top-down projects presented as bottom-up projects, did not work in the case of the Cypriot Greek Church, Orthodox Church, and they blocked it. So what emerged was an academic declaration, but was not adopted as it was planned in a grand conference in Cyprus, both in north and south. It was blocked because of this lack of actual contact and establishing some kind of relations with the actual local agents, despite the declarations to the contrary. And Cyprus is actually very important for Southeast Europe because of the legacy of conflict and division in the area and the variety of issues that are still being resolved also on the level of religious heritage protection. Still, this was a good attempt. The declaration exists, I can share it, and it can be resumed in a new way. Why not in Southeast Europe, in the future, should we have more understanding and more flexible European Union officials. So, I'm reaching the conclusions now with something possibly positive, and it is clear that we have certain type, different approach in the European Union heritage language and policies, the way they formulate them and implement them, and the self-censoring mechanisms which amputate, eliminate religious and spiritual from the actual documents. And to some extent, we have a very, possibly the opposite approach in Southeast Europe or generally in Eastern Europe, Russian Federation, etc. So we have to be aware of that, and any future policy and legal approaches to religious heritage in Southeastern Europe, conflict, post-conflict, etc., needs to take into account these problem areas. And omissions in the European Union treaties, documents, policy documents, conclusions and recommendations in the last 15 years. Collaboration with these European Union initiatives needs to balance the interests of the individual states and the common EU interests. The short-term European Union approaches designed to unilaterally communicate positive messages about the European Union need to be balanced with long-term dialogue and cooperation efforts that consider local, national, and regional contexts and needs. These initiatives and agendas offer substantial potential for cultivating international and regional avenues of religious heritage understanding and protection, and its role as a vehicle for post-conflict conciliation between antagonistic groups. But such collaboration needs to be based on a dialogue and reciprocal cooperation between the central institution of the European Union and the Southeast European member and candidate member states. And thank you for your attention. Wow.
Thank you very much, Professor Stoyanov. It was very, how to say, detailed presentation. This is the way how in European Union they do it. But my experience is, I will tell you, actually, it was very heavy for me to adopt this kind of approach. Maybe I'm not this kind of researcher or professor or what, but if you don't read these regulatives, laws, convention like this, then you come in the situation that it's like with the insurance policy, but you didn't read the small letters down, and then you have a problem. So we have to learn to read it and then to build up.
Thank you. Thank you, Yuri, for the very nice lecture. I'll speak in Croatian, Serbian, local, or whatever you call it. All right. Now that I've listened to this presentation, my question is, when you worked on the analysis of these religious views that are ignored by the EU, is there an idea why this is happening? Why is this religious way of thinking is not taken into account when it comes to culture?
Why this is not considered? This religious flow of thinking is not really considered in legal documents and also in our global thinking in European Union as a real heritage of all these countries in Europe. Not only from the perspective of today religious flows, but also the flows which influenced the flows which we have today.
I don't have an answer or diagnosis why this happened, but it happened. And I think we can see the first stages of this project, of this development, probably around the time of the Treaty of Lisbon, 2007, when this debate emerged. And I remember Otto von Habsburg, who was considered to be the father of the pan-European movement. The European Parliament warned that if this process continues, European Union or Europe is going to lose its soul. There is a long speech by Otto von Habsburg around 2004, 2005. So he did warn about this problem. And the other reality, the other dimension is that originally the European project was developed intellectually by Christian thinkers in the 30s, in the 40s, and in the 50s, Catholic and Protestant. So we have very interesting evolution in the last 15 years, or maybe 20 years, when this original fundamental religious spiritual foundation is actually marginalized. And these documents which I showed demonstrate this process. And that was my attempt to give a positive suggestion, was that, I mean, traditionally, let's say, in Europe, the greatest biological diversity is in the Iberian Peninsula and in the Balkan Peninsula. This applies also to the spiritual and cultural diversity. Traditionally, Spain, Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula was the convivencia, etc. But from one period onwards, of course, Islamic and Jewish heritage were repressed from the 15th century onward. Well, in Southeast Europe, we have this period, despite the conflicts, antagonism continued. So actually, returning to what Monsignor Hodjeva said, actually Southeast Europe can kind of contribute to the recovery of some of these lost foundational layers in the thinking about the European Union, but maybe this is wishful thinking, trying to be optimistic, because the documents do show big intellectual problem and understanding what religion and spirituality is about. Yeah, but that's essential question.
Isn't the new religions which are entering?
Interesting question. I also have to say that when we had this last conference in Brussels and in Cyprus, the European Union official actually invited religious leaders. Mustafa Ceric was there, producing speeches, etc., etc. But this is just a facade. Actually, they were not involved in the, in the actual wording of the document, etc. Although I must say the document, the declaration for the protection of the sacred sites, is quite good, because it was done by Catholic scholars mostly from the University of Milan. So I think it is a very good one, and they adopted it. But it didn't work on the level of cooperation and collaboration, and even trying to understand the religious leaders who are actually there in Cyprus, the Islamic community or the Greek Orthodox. So we didn't. The new religious movement, this is becoming an issue that needs to be addressed also. I'm not sure whether this has affected the thinking. It's more the so-called humanist, what I think he mentioned, Borbiniatism, that sort of militant secularism or atheism for the time being. But returning to one question that was asked, this is becoming a problem in US politics with the so-called Temple of Satan, because they registered community and they want to participate in the prayer breakfasts, which various American municipalities, etc. And if they are not invited to bless the meeting of a council, like now in Boston, they go to court because they want to bless them on behalf, etc. So this also can have an impact.
I am afraid so. Thank you.